Ashley, welcome to the Joy Project.
Thank you, Krista. I'm super happy to be here. Can't wait to talk about what brings me joy, but it took me a while to narrow it down. Dogs, the smell of rain, sunsets, Mexican food, tacos, all these things.
Even though our world is on fire, there are still things to be joyful about. You sent me a quote by the beloved Mary Oliver, who's one of our favorites. The last line in the quote was, "Your joy is not made to be a crumb."
Oh,
and that we are not to take those crumbs off the table that fall down for us, but that we are to have joy in abundance and to go out and seek it and to make it and to find it. And joy feels like a privilege sometimes, especially when we're going through a difficult time or somebody we know is going through a difficult time. And how do you reconcile those things?
That's an excellent question. Part of the human condition is that we're never just one thing, right? We're never just one thing. It's not that easy. We can simultaneously be 7 different things, and those can be in conflict with each other. But that's just, that's the beauty and the messiness of being a human. I think of things that people would hold most sacred and dear that are beautiful to them, their religion or their family members or their pets. And at the same time, they can be fiercely fighting for justice in a messy, unfriendly world. And so I think joy is complex, just like life is complex. It's okay to feel more than one thing. I often tell that to my students when they're working through conflict, is that we have space for more than one feeling. And one of those feelings can be joy. When we're talking about history, oftentimes we're talking about really heavy subjects and people who've dealt with loss or oppression. One of my goals as a history teacher of young people is to always make sure that we look at all sides of the story, including what joy these people might have felt at the same time that they were maybe experiencing oppression, because they might have been experiencing oppression at the same time as they were creating beautiful art. We're complex humans.
Exactly. Joy is what keeps me going through difficult times. It's how I get back up so that I can keep going.
There's 2 points that you just reminded me of. Oftentimes joy can be confused with naivete. There's people who have sort of been challenged in a moment of turmoil when they were still trying to find joy, of how can you be so positive in such a rough time? And I think any of us who practice mindfulness know that finding joy is a practice, that you have to always be on the lookout for it, because that's what keeps you buoyed in a moment of crisis. One of my quick meditations that I do literally every day is, what color is the sky? Stop and notice the color of the sky. And sometimes it's glorious and sometimes it's gray or purple and quiet. And that's just a centering, joyful moment for me, because then something's going to happen. A bird's going to fly by, or, something joyful.
Yeah. And I love that idea of it being a muscle, something that you have to practice, something that doesn't come easy to some people. And so it doesn't come easy to us in certain times in our lives, in certain seasons.
Absolutely.
Of our lives, right? And I think the more that we can practice it and come back to it. I was taking a yoga class this morning, and my yoga teacher said, the problem with life is that we think there should be no problems. That hit me so hard, because I feel like, especially over the last couple of years, I felt like, why is our world having to go through this? It shouldn't be like this.
That reminds me of Fred Rogers, like when the worst things are happening, look for the people who are helping, look for the helpers.
Yes.
And again, that could be seen as a naive way to go about problem solving or dealing with rough stuff. But I don't know. I think that there's joy in that. There's joy in noticing the helpers.
I also want to get back to you talking about being a history teacher of young people. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your work and where you live and where you're joining us from.
I grew up in California, and I lived there for the first 24 years of my life. Then I began a series of living in major cities in the United States. After that, went to grad school in Chicago, which was wonderful. Moved to Washington, D.C., did grad school there for a little while, then ended up in Brooklyn, New York, where I've been for the past 15 years. And I feel like I'm a real New Yorker now. And I've actually even lived in the same apartment for over 12 years, which is the longest duration I've ever called a dwelling home. So in some ways, I feel really attached to my space in Brooklyn. But ironically, I'm joining you not from any of those places. I'm joining you from Northampton, Massachusetts, which is in Western Massachusetts, tucked in the Happy Valley, as they call it. And it's It's a really misty, gloomy day outside, and it makes the New England church steeples and the naked trees all very picturesque. I am a fourth grade teacher, and I've been a fourth grade teacher for over 12 years. My favorite thing about working with young people is their inherent curiosity, just nonstop curiosity. They're not afraid to ask questions. Be around children who are curious is amazing. And fourth graders are 9 and 10 years old, and they're at this age where they're really learning to grapple with what it means to be developing into your own person. So a lot of times when you're reading fourth grade literature, as you know, you're someone who writes for this age, but you're dealing with kids who are experiencing what it means to be away from their parents and taking on a world on their own. And there's a reason why those themes come up a lot in kid literature, is because they're starting to understand big world themes, and they're starting to understand what time is. We, as adults, hold these concrete things like time pretty well. We can make sense of them, but for children, it is really abstract. And fourth grade is a time where they start to be curious about history and what history means. And I delight in talking about history with them and showing them how to ask questions or find resources. When I'm not teaching young people, I do lectures for adults on history, and also, like you, Krista, am a licensed tour guide for the city of New York, which people might be interested to know. We had to take a very difficult, very long test that was like 3 hours long to pass 200 questions or something. It was very long. That was all about the history of our city and sort of secret stories, and also really strange things like where you can and can't park your tour bus. Talking to other people about history and the past is my joy, and helping people understand that everything has a history. Everyone has a history. I see it as one of my challenges in life to help everyone connect to something interesting, something that's interesting to them from the past. Because one of my deepest feelings as an educator, one of my deepest beliefs is that engagement and curiosity is what leads to the best learning. And so if we can get people engaged and curious, I'm going to help you learn something interesting about history.
And I love how many things bring you joy and how you delight in them, and the mindfulness of it and the practice of it. And for this episode, I'm wondering, is there something specifically that you want to talk about? And Ashley Semrick, what brings you joy?
I thought hard about how to say this, but I think I'm just going to say it simply. Old things bring me joy. By things, I mean everything from photographs to cobblestone roads to cemeteries to buildings to the stories of people that we might not even know yet. I can't look at an object, especially like an object in a museum or an antique store. I can't look at an object without wondering who made this, who held this, who used this, who cared for this, who gave this away. All of those questions pop into my mind. And sometimes it's just a mystery and you're never going to know. But as you said, it is a practice, a mindfulness habit of sort of interrogating what stories can this object tell, or this building? Who touched these bricks? Who painted this wall 200 years ago? And I sometimes find incredible mundane objects. I'm going to pause briefly to say that this story connects to the whole reason why I think I love old things in history. Is like so many people, I grew up with it. My parents, both my dad was a lover of antiques, is a lover of antiques, and still obsessively collects things and sends them to me. And my mother was sort of a hobby historian and a genealogist. I grew up knowing the stories of my past and when my immigrant family members had come over and all of that sort of thing. And by the age of 10, I could tell you if a Victorian house had colors that were historically accurate, because my mother was an artist and liked that kind of thing. But when I was about 11, my dad, in some box of objects he got from the auction, gave me a diary from 1902. And it was, imagine a composition book from 1902. And it was started on January 1st and it ended on December 31st. And it was, the handwriting was so hard to read, but I powered through. And it was just a diary, a very straightforward, today I did this, today we saw these people, today we went to church, today we cleaned the house, nothing extreme. It was cool. It was old. And I was drawn to it. And I knew it was, I could, like, my 11-year-old historian self was like, oh, it says Saginaw, Michigan. I don't know anything about Michigan. I'm just like a California kid. This is interesting. And then the diary disappeared. And I thought of it a few years ago and was like, wonder where that notebook went. This past fall, I was in California again, cleaning out my parents' house. My dad is still alive, but the book had somehow made its way to my mom's collection of stuff. And I found it as I was cleaning out her art room. Oh, I've thought about this so many times. I'm going to bring it home. So I brought it home, and on a whim, I read it again. And I thought, this is really, I wonder who this guy was. And I actually thought it was a woman. Turns out it was a guy. And I went to the place of all good things, the internet, and did a little sleuthing. And lo and behold, I found him on ancestry.com. And the more I read, the more it linked me to some primary sources. And I found a newspaper article. And this young man passed away 6 years after writing this diary. He, very young, was caught by a sudden terminal illness that just took him like that. And so he never married, he never had children. And I was just blown away by it. And I thought, I'll follow his family tree. And I reached out to a young woman who was in his family tree. And I said, hey, I think I found an artifact that belonged to one of your family members. Let me know if you would like to see it. Months went by. She didn't answer, and I kind of forgot about it. Yesterday, I saw that she'd sent me a message. She said, yes, that is a relative in my family. He died so young, and we didn't have anything that he left behind. And I was like, well, I have his diary from 1902, and he wrote every day, and I'm happy to send it to you. And so I'm waiting to hear back from her now. And I just think how much of a story is contained in this one very straightforward, not that interesting, like event-wise diary, but that just holds someone's entire life for a year. And then he passed away not long after. And now his family has this artifact that just gives them a little bit more information.
Oh God, I love that story. One that you were like, I wonder what happened to that diary. And then it happened to be in your mom's home. Your dad got it at an auction where he sounds like he bought a box of stuff. And you sent me pictures of like your dad's arrow collection.
My dad's like, oh, this is a Maasai warrior lion killing ceremonial spear. I'm like, that's great, Dad. I love that for you.
I love that your house is full of this stuff. And then that you were like, I'm curious about this person. I wonder who he is. Your story also highlights the value of media and the value of stories and writing these things down and making them available to the public through archives, through auctions and things like this, of like making them available, because this family probably always thought, well, we had this young man who was our ancestor, always wondering, I wonder what his life was like.
Well, and it brings such humanity to someone who was just a name on a document before, in some sense. It makes me think of two things. One, you said the media, being able to have access to media to do research into these lives. But again, I'm crediting my parents here. When I was a little girl, I was a Girl Scout, and my mother was the troop leader. And because my mom was also, like I said, a hobby historian, I remember one of our Girl Scout troop trips, like our field trip, was to the local cemetery to do headstone rubbings. So we go to the Clovis, California cemetery, and here we all are in little green in our sashes and going around rubbing headstones. And we come across this very large headstone that had the pictures of 6 children on it. And all the children had perished on the same day in the 60s, the 1960s. And this was my first research mission with my mom. My mom was like, we're going to take some rubbings and take this information and we're going to research it. And I had no idea what you could even do. So we went, now this is the 80s. There was no internet for us to use anyway. We went to the public library and we pulled up microfiche. And my mom showed me how to use microfiche and look through past dated newspapers. And so we took the death date of the children. We used that as our jumping off point. We pulled it up, and lo and behold, these 6 children were all killed in a house fire. And it was a huge deal. And I remember just being blown away that we found the answer to this mystery. And I think that was definitely a gateway drug into exploring stories of people who couldn't tell their own stories anymore. Coda to that, many, many years later, I would say in the late 90s, early 2000s, the newspaper in my hometown did a huge piece revisiting that story and like what had happened to this family. And it was very interesting.
I also love that I was also a Girl Scout. My mom was also our troop leader. We did not go to cemeteries, but as you and I have talked about many times, we have a great passion and love for cemeteries. I think they are places of peace. Many times they tend to be the only green place in a neighborhood, which I think is really important. I think the honor that they illustrate is fascinating. I often will take names from headstones and use them in stories because it's so inspiring to find names that way. And I love a really good old, I grew up in the Hudson Valley. And so, we have lots of old like Revolutionary War cemeteries up there. My hometown has a very, very old cemetery that has pre-Revolutionary War headstones. And it's just, for me, I feel like honoring, I grew up in a military town. Memorial Day was a really big deal. Veterans Day was a really big deal. Most of the people in my town had served in the military in some way, or their family members had served in the military in some way. It was always so important to honor people who made it possible for us to exist and for us to be here and have the lives that we have. And so that joy of old things. I also know that you're a big found object person.
That diary, I'm just so always curious about things. I'm thinking of, I really do love old photographs, and specifically photographs from the 19th century or the early 20th century. I mean, if someone 100 years from now just saw our picture and didn't know anything else about us, I wonder what they would assume about us. And so I often keep that in mind when I'm looking at photos, and, we search for these clues of facial expression. And we also know that that might not be the whole story or the truth. I have a beautiful, it's called a cabinet card, when you have an older photo like from the 19th century and it's mounted on some cardboard to give it some thickness. And usually the photographer's name is sort of embossed at the bottom. And I have this beautiful photo of a little girl, and she's sort of haunting looking, and she's holding a doll. On the back, in quill pen, is written in a very childhood scrawl, Agnes. So she definitely wrote her own name, I assume. But I found it in an antique store in Red Wing, Minnesota. And as I picked it up and walked to the counter, the girl behind and I was with a handful of other wonderful old photos. The girl behind the counter, she goes, "Oh, you're taking Agnes." And I was like, "Yeah, I love Agnes." And she's like, "I'm pretty sure her ghost comes with the photo." Agnes has not paid me a visit that I know of, but she sits on my mantle looking charming. So I do love found objects. I love to stand in the museum and look at things and think of how they got there, who brought them, if there's someone I can't see whose energy is next to me and telling me that they used to use that object. I think, there's the wonderful physics idea that energy never dies, right? Who am I to say that the owner of the object isn't observing? I volunteer in a historic house, Manhattan's most haunted home. I have never personally experienced anything spooky there, but the Merchant House Museum has been around since the early 1800s. One family lived there for 100 years. Gertrude, the youngest daughter, was born and died there. She passed away in 1930s, so she lived there for the entirety of her life. Much of the furniture in the house belonged to the family. So it's landmarked inside and out. It's a really special place. When I'm there working, I'm often alone on a floor all to myself or wandering around, and I talk to them because I can only imagine that, like, this is Gertrude's bed. She slept here her entire life. I often will just thank whoever's in the house. "Thanks for letting me be here. Hope everyone's having a good day." And I look at the objects in the house and I think, these were used at Christmas time. These were used in celebration. This is a couch where someone fell asleep. All the things that we do, just our everyday lives, are held within these historic objects. And it makes me really happy to think about the layers of history.
And I love that idea, especially in our world now, where it's, everything bright, shiny, and new. Throw out the old stuff you have. Get all new stuff. Be a minimalist. Be, all these messages that we get. And I still think that there is something so beautiful about something old, something that's passed down, whether you get it in an antique store or it's passed down by a family member. I love the idea of, in New York, people throw stuff out on the street, and I have gotten some very good street finds like that way of it's as opposed to like, let me go to a store and pay X number of dollars. Well, no, let me go out on the street
Yeah, I mean, furniture, artwork. I'm thinking of when you and I went to the sanitation museum, where it's literally an entire warehouse devoted to things that people had thrown out. And we walk through those jam-packed aisles. I mean, I feel like for listeners, they need to know, imagine the most crammed antique store you've ever seen, but everything's very much sorted. So like there's a pile of pocket watches and 35 different suitcases. And you're just wandering, looking at all these objects. Every single one of them belonged to someone who used it, who had a life, who decided to throw it away. The things that we saw there, we saw a taxidermied pit bull.
And all of these things, for listeners, there is a man who worked at the sanitation department for well over 30 years. He drove one of the trucks. He made it his mission to, as he was collecting things that people had thrown out, to collect the things that he thought were really interesting, that were museum worthy. And the sanitation department gave him this space at their headquarters way over on the east side of Manhattan. And they gave him the space to display all these things. I mean, the artwork, the posters, the jewelry, photographs, furniture, this taxidermied pit bull, clothing. I mean, and you can't buy any of it. It is just there as a museum. But it is incredible to think, we live in a city of almost 10 million people. This has been one of the largest cities in the world for, most of its existence. And to think of the number of people that have come through the city. I love that idea when you're walking and thinking, oh, who like walk these streets? And I went to college in Philadelphia. And so I always, especially there, think about it, like Ben Franklin walked on these streets. His heeled shoes, click, clack, click, clack.
I know. And in some ways, that sanitation museum is the museum. That's our history museum of our city, right? Because it's the everyman museum. It's not the fancy museum. It's the everyman museum. And I think of, you're talking about places that hold history too. I think of you and I, we had lunch at Fraunces Tavern back when the weather was nice. And that's a place, Fraunces Tavern has been around since the founding of our city. And that's a place where you can go into the very room where the Sons of Liberty and Washington were talking about the revolution and celebrating victory. And to me, it's just such a privilege to acknowledge the past. And I'm going to use this phrase again, the layers of history, right? Because even before that, we know that the Lenape were creating their own history. I have a walking guidebook of Manhattan that has sort of like hidden histories. And one of them is these archaeologists found this incredible, what is presumed to be a Lenape burial ground for objects. It wasn't necessarily for humans. They didn't find human remains, but they found objects carefully buried and animals that were clearly ceremonially buried because they were in a certain position with different artifacts with them. And I just think our history just keeps going. And you, as a science nerd, know that even beyond that, we're looking at the glacial history of our city and the remains of hadrosaurs. It just never stops, the unpacking of the old things and the layers.
One thing that I love about that is that there will never be an end to it. We're adding on to it all the time. And in some ways, I find it so hopeful that 100 years from now, when you and I are ghosts and like haunting the streets of New York City together, which I think is just going to be an absolute blast.
I know we'll be whispering facts about history to people.
There are things that we have left behind. It's one of the reasons that I write, is that I hope that these books will live on long after I do, the way that that books that we read from people have lived on long after. And you told me a story about an essay about why you should have a physicist speak at your funeral. And that idea of every smile that you emit, those atoms are still pushing out into the world. And so that idea of everything that we do having meaning, not only for us in our lifetimes, but for the many, many, many people who will come after us. And that kind of hopeful feeling about history of, oh, I am going to go on. There are parts of me that will go on after our, very long and very happy lives. There will be something that remains. And I love that about history.
I do too. And it really, as you were talking and I was thinking of places where that you get a feeling, because sometimes, I'm willing to get a little spooky woo-woo, as they say, about history, but that's only because I think most people have sort of experienced going somewhere and getting a vibe, right? Like either a comforting vibe or like, ooh, this feels a little creepy, I don't want to be here. Could I say is a step-by-step guide to connecting with history. And it really is your own inherent curiosity. I think of history like I think of art. There's no one right way in. You like whatever art you like. Don't apologize for that. You're interested in whatever history you're interested in. If Civil War battles are your jam, rock on. I hope you go to every battlefield and feel the feels. You know, Lord knows when I lived in Virginia, I definitely went on lots of battlefield weekend trips. But it's also just about allowing yourself to enter a space or be with a piece of art or be with an object or be with a story and just be with it. Just learn to sit with it and rest and see what comes. So you, like me, love to travel alone because going somewhere alone really gives you the permission to take time. And so if you are in a graveyard and you just want to sit and enjoy the piece, you might not have a spooky woo-woo connection, but you're enjoying a moment of history. And cemeteries are, in a sense, they're public history, right? They help people learn about the past of a place. When I went to Scotland and I would just sit in the stairwells of castles alone and just touch the wall, you know, because something felt so special about that. It felt really, really like I was connecting to some sort of history. And was I really? Like, was anyone actively talking to me? No, but I was taking enough time to be curious and to imagine going back in time. One of the things I do for my students is we spent most of this year studying Black American history and then doing a really in-depth study of the civil rights era in America. As you know, a lot of the photos from that era are Black and white. One of the things that I'm helping children understand when I am actively teaching history to children, helping them understand it was not that long ago. The 1960s was not that long ago. And so I was showing them these wonderful photos from the March on Washington. And then I'd found someone online who had colorized the same photos. And so I show a Black and white photo of some marchers with their signs, you know, job for march and freedom, show the Black and white. And then without even saying anything, no preamble, I just clicked to the next slide where the same photo immediately went colorized. The gasp in the room, the kids lost their mind. And I just let them sort of emote for a second. And then I said, what just happened? It seems so real now. She looks like she could be here yesterday. Like that somehow triggered something in their mind that helped them understand better. And so that's one of the examples of whatever it takes for you to get interested in history. It's your choice. Don't make any apologies for it. Just dig, be curious, search for things, because it's kind of a nonstop journey. I want to share one more story of old things and the energy that they may or may not contain. I was at the Met Museum. This was about a year ago. They were getting ready to close. I'm sure you, like me, have your greatest hits at the Met that you like to visit, say hello to, you know, and then you have your plan. And I was like, the museum's closing and I haven't gone through the Diker Indigenous Art Collection and the American Wing. I've got to do it. Okay, I have like 10 minutes and I can go do that Indigenous Art Collection. So I'm like hustling, I'm doing my fast New York walking and I get to the doors. So this particular collection of Indigenous objects is behind glass doors. And I'm hustling, I'm walking, and I throw open the door and I go to do my fast New York walking. I'm literally 2 steps into the room and I hear a voice in my head, because I know it wasn't real, a voice just say, slow down. It stopped me in my tracks, took a deep breath. Okay, I'm moving slower now. Did the objects tell me that? Did the ghosts tell me that? I don't know. Something told me to slow down because for whatever reason, the objects in that room wanted a little more stillness, a little more reverence, and a little more respect. And I heard it, so I gave it to them. And it just stuck with me. I remember telling my partner afterwards, like the weirdest thing happened to me as I was trying to hustle through the last part of the museum. And it just, to this day, remains one of the most clear experiences of old things demanding what they needed me to do. And I think within our own lives, we do our own set of personal preservation. I'm thinking of, like, I have a watercolor hanging in my house that it says for Len and Naomi on their 50th anniversary or something like that. And it was like a friend of theirs painted a watercolor of some ships. And it's in this cheesy, like early 80s acrylic frame. That watercolor hangs on my wall now. And when I look at it, it's not just a painting from Grandma and Grandpa's house. It yanks me back in time to being a little girl with my cousins by the pool, hot summer, spaghetti dinners, like all of these memories come rushing back because that hung on the wall in their home. And so we develop our own histories for our objects in our lives. And there are object histories that may die with us, or if, like you said, writing things down. My house is so full of storied objects because objects tell stories. That's another one of my teaching philosophies, is that's how we get curious and dig in. Would challenge people to look around their own homes and think, like, what is an object that tells a story of me or my family? Maybe I should write that down.
Ashley, this was an absolute delight to talk about the joy of old things with my very dear friend. And I'm just so grateful to you for spending some time with us, for sharing your joy of old things, for the work you do in teaching our young people about history. And I am just so grateful that you would spend time with us. And I'm so glad that you're in the world. Thanks so much for joining us on the Joy Project.
Thank you, Krista. And thank you for encouraging people to share their joy and notice what brings them joy. And I'll encourage them to think about something in their lives that maybe holds a little bit of history, theirs or someone else's.
Thank you so much, Ashley. I hope you will come back and join us again. And I hope that you keep finding joy everywhere you go.
Thank you.